Welcome to News Analysis, coming to you from the Iranian capital, Tehran, where we discuss two of the day's top stories in depth. I'm Nargis Moualaghi. Well, it all started over allegations of widespread fraud in the June 12th presidential elections in Iran, the aftermath of which led to unrest in Tehran and some other major cities in Iran. There were anti-government protests and violence when night fell. 6 months on, the story continues, but many say that on Sunday the story changed. Anti-government riots in the streets of Tehran led to the death of 8 people. The riots on Sunday have drawn a strong reaction that you're seeing on your screens as we speak. Millions of Iranians have been out on the street protesting what they call a violation of the sanctity of the day of Ashura, which of course was on Sunday as well. And to show their support for the Islamic establishment and the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, they've come out on the streets in their millions. US President Barack Obama has condemned what he calls Iran's iron fist of brutality against protesters. And French President Nicolas Sarkozy has condemned what he called the bloody repression of the protests in Iran. But the people out on the streets in Tehran on Thursday say it is countries like the US, France and Britain who are stirring up the unrest. This programme, we discuss the different allegations and the recent developments in Iran with our guests. Joining us here in the studio, Professor at the University of Tehran, Dr. Mohammad Morandi, and columnist and commentator, Mr. Nader Mokhtari. Many thanks to both of you for being with us. Let me start with you, Mr. Mokhtari. How have things changed in the last few days?
How things changed, it depends which angle you look at it from. I think the Ashura Day riots were pre-planned, they were well planned, and they were aimed at creating a kind of the kind of chaos and the level of deaths that would make force the Iranian government into a complete corner. But the show of support in other cities, in their millions, yesterday, and also in Tehran today, one estimate said 2 million, another said 3 million, puts the popularity of the establishment beyond any doubt. Having said that, AFP reported tens of thousands, and AP also reported tens of thousands. Yeah. It seems in the Greek tradition they have problems with their zeros.
Well, of course, you pick up there on the media coverage, and Dr. Morandi, that's one of the big criticisms by protesters today. Let's be more specific on these. When these anti-riot protesters are reported, Reuters have called them pro-government supporters. DPA calls them state-sponsored demonstrations. BBC, who's been under a lot of criticism by these protesters, say that state-owned companies were the ones that provided transport for their employees to boost up the numbers and to take part. They called it had ominous religious tones, the words of the BBC. The Washington Post, Iran hardliners back government in mass rallies. Just from the wording, there's a real sense that these people out on the streets that we've seen in Tehran aren't the people that these media outlets want to pay attention to. And as these protesters have been saying, there's an imbalance in the way that the things have been reported.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think it's something that we've been experiencing for the last 3 decades, really. And I think, again, the Western media does a great disservice to its own people when it does this, because it causes Western governments to miscalculate when it comes to countries like Iran. Obviously, no one who, if someone didn't want to participate, they would not have participated. And in fact, the enormous crowds, which was, for me, very surprising, to be honest. The sheer size of the crowd, despite the fact that it was on a working day, kids were at school, people were at work, shops were open. It took me by surprise, and I think it shows that the so-called opposition miscalculated seriously. Of course, there is not a monolithic opposition. There are people who are opposed to Mr. Ahmadinejad's administration. There are those who are critical of it, and there are those who support it. And then there are the extremist groups that we're talking about. I think that I mean specifically those who rioted during Ashura. But the Western media basically seems that it will never really do Iran justice, at least for the foreseeable future.
Mr. Mokhtari, were these pro-government protests, were they pro-Ahmadinejad protests?
These were pro-government. No, they're not pro-government. They're pro-framework of the Islamic Republic demonstrations. We need to have an operating system. A democracy cannot operate within a framework, and that they were pro the framework of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they showed up in large enough numbers to put that to clear that up altogether.
Well, I mean, in no sense of the word, Dr. Morandi, do all Iranians have one view. They're not all pro-Ahmadinejad. We know that from the elections. There's differing views about how the country is structured. But when it comes to these protests today, were there people with differing views there? Say, for example, were they all pro-Ahmadinejad?
I'm sure there were a huge number of people who were very pro-Ahmadinejad. After all, he is very popular throughout the country, whether some people like it or not. But obviously I'm sure there were strong elements of, and many people there who are opposed to him or who are critical of him, yet who are very upset about the way the losing candidates, Mr. Mousavi or Mr. Karoubi, as well as some of the extremists who took part in the Ashura riots, they are very upset about how they've been behaving. And I think also many people in Iran are very angry about the way which the West has conducted itself. It seems as if Western countries are advocating mob rule in this country. When you look at the Persian television channels being broadcast into the country that are funded by the United States and the British, it effectively, what they are trying to do is stir up tension in the country. And advocating mob rule is something very dangerous because effectively they bear responsibility for death and destruction. They cannot escape that. And I really would like one day to see some students do research and to actually translate these what these people say on satellite television that is funded by these governments into English, so that people in English-speaking countries could see exactly what sort of language is used.
I mean, some of these outlets, other people, not just media outlets, have criticised Mr. Mokhtari, the tone that comes out of Iran. They say that it is, for example, what President Ahmadinejad says is undiplomatic, or that it stirs up the situation inside the country.
Well, Mr. Ahmadinejad means well, although decidedly his language may not be diplomatic in the way that diplomacy is perceived by seasoned politicians. However, the adjectives used within BBC and CNN, Fox, the little adjectives that they work into their newspeak, anywhere else in the world would be considered subjective. Whereas if Iran does try and get its point of view across and try and get its point of view across, with clarity, it is immediately misrepresented. So you just need to listen. The BBC is talking about, for instance, the Iranian civilian nuclear program, and then in the background you see missiles, and these visual signals, or there is a reference to the military always when there is the talk maybe about a meeting in Geneva.